Imagine a world where human life surpassed all known limits, where people lived for centuries, and nature was shaped by human labor and willpower. This is the pre-flood world, a mysterious and distant era marked by the rise and fall of the first civilization. Adam and Eve, after being expelled from Eden, established a society that would evolve amidst cultural advancements, refined techniques, and a period of unparalleled development. But it didn't take long for corruption and pride to take over, and a menacing shadow began to form, like a storm on the horizon. Have you ever wondered what it was like in that era? And how it was lost so tragically? What happened to this ancient civilization, and what could we learn from it today? As we follow this journey, we'll explore the highs and lows of this time and delve into the wisdom it offers us. But be careful. This story is not just about the past, it's a reflection on choices, consequences, and above all, faith and redemption. The world they built was about to face its own downfall, and the role of one man, Noah, would become crucial for the survival of what goodness still remained. Get ready, because over the next few minutes, we'll uncover mysteries, understand the dynamics of this civilization, and explore the lessons hidden within its ruins. By the end, you'll have more than just a story, you'll gain a new perspective on what it means to live with purpose, face temptations, and persevere even in the darkest times. So, are you ready to embark on this epic journey? Press play, and together let's discover the secrets of the antediluvian world. Imagine a vast, untamed world, where the scenery was rich land, a true garden where humanity thrived. The pre-flood period, as we know it, was a time when longevity exceeded any imaginable limit, and life was marked by a unique coexistence between humans and the creatures of the earth. People lived for hundreds of years, allowing knowledge to be passed from generation to generation with an unprecedented depth. During this time, civilization was still in its early phase, but it was full of innovations that symbolized the beginning of a grand human adventure. Those who lived before the flood, our ancestors, were witnesses to a world where nature was both an ally and a challenge. Yet, despite all the prosperity, something threatened this initial peace, something invisible that lurked in the shadows and promised to change everything. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in such an era? An era where the rules of our modern reality seem to hold no influence? Here, we're not talking about simple stories, but about the pre-flood world, an era where strength, longevity, and human knowledge flourished side by side. Even with a certain purity in the air, the shadows of sin began to creep in. This delicate balance between good and evil draws us in, inviting us to understand what really happened beneath the surface. Join me on this journey, and together we'll uncover the mysteries and implications of this distant and crucial era. In every corner of this early civilization, the mystery of how and why everything happened makes us question, what really lies hidden in this pre-flood world? What did the descendants of Adam and Eve face? We start to realize that this time wasn't just about a peaceful, long-lasting life. It was about the choices that the first men had to make. The lure of sin, the power of temptation, and the need for moral choices shaped this early civilization. And here, you, the viewer, are called to join this story. What would you have done if you were there when evil began to haunt purity? It's curious how, even in a time of prosperity, a seemingly simple impulse could spark deep consequences. We can imagine those early men gazing at the stars, perhaps sensing that something big was about to happen, something that would affect not only them but all future generations. Every step of this story takes us through a maze of discoveries and lessons. And then comes an inevitable question: what made this world change so much to the point of being swallowed by the Great Flood? But, as in any journey, trials arise. Early civilizations faced intense challenges balancing the gift of longevity with the burden of sin. The curiosity that grows in us as we imagine this time is just the beginning. Now we need to dive into the depths of the pre-flood world and explore the marks left by the descendants of Adam and Eve in history. The temptations were great, the conflicts between good and evil were almost tangible, and the atmosphere was filled with suspense. And so, with every detail of this period, we are led to question what we truly learned from humanity's first experiences. This journey is only beginning, and I invite you to dive even deeper into this story. How about showing your support now, giving the video a like, and ensuring this knowledge continues to be explored? After being expelled from Eden, Adam and Eve found themselves in a wild world, still untouched by human presence but full of potential. At first, they were the only inhabitants of a vast and unknown land where every step was a discovery, and every experience was a lesson. They laid the foundation for what would become the first civilization, facing the challenges of an unexplored world. Imagine standing beside these first inhabitants, who had to learn to survive in a hostile environment, building their homes, creating a family structure, and developing the first techniques to sustain themselves. It wasn't just a struggle for survival, it was a journey of building and discovery, a call to create a civilization from scratch. They had no guides or manuals, only the knowledge remaining from their time in paradise and the desire to create something lasting. This was a civilization that lived in an era when the concepts of good and evil were still fresh and vivid, echoing in humanity's memory. And it was in this context that the descendants of Adam and Eve, especially Cain and Abel, left profound and symbolic marks on humanity. Each child and grandchild represented a new aspect of civilization, carrying with them not only the virtues of their parents but also the conflicts that shaped history. Cain, in particular, was a pioneer, but not in the way we might imagine. He bore the weight of difficult choices and, with him, inaugurated a controversial path, introducing the concept of conflict and violence within this first civilization. His act against Abel became a symbol of humanity's first great moral dilemma, revealing the complexities of the human heart and, at the same time, the destructive potential that began to manifest within society. Alongside this conflict, a city was born, founded by Cain in an attempt to move forward and find a new identity. He named this city Enoch, after his son, and there, for the first time, humans began to experience what it meant to live in a community. This city was an expression of innovation, a mix of cultures and beliefs, where traditions began to emerge and family ties intertwined with personal ambitions. It was a time of progress, where man sought to expand his skills and knowledge. But, at the same time, the seeds of corruption and pride were being sown. Enoch was not just a gathering of people, it was a representation of the choices and conflicts that defined the first civilization. For us, observers of this distant past, Cain's story and his city serve as a warning and, at the same time, a mirror. The civilization he built arose from a deep desire for reinvention but bore the mark of violence, power struggles, and unchecked ambition. With each advance, mankind distanced itself a bit more from the original ideal set in Eden. The construction of the city brought with it a new sense of community and responsibility. Cain and his descendants introduced organized work and technological development that would forever mark humanity's path. However, this growth came at a high price. Enoch would become the first stage where human pride and power would confront divine values. The first civilization was a reflection of all human potential but also of the flaws and temptations that would later be explored. The story of Cain and his city gives us our first glimpse into a society where good and evil were in constant conflict. If you find this journey intriguing, don't forget to follow the channel to continue exploring these epic stories and their profound meanings. Let's unveil the layers of this civilization together, where each step reveals a new secret. As the first civilization evolved, its inhabitants began exploring new forms of expression and innovation. Cain's descendants, determined to overcome the challenges of life in Enoch, developed skills and knowledge that would transform daily life and bring new cultural energy to humanity. Herd keepers, talented musicians, and metalworkers emerged during this period as pioneers, laying the foundations for a more complex and diverse society. This pursuit of innovation was both fascinating and dangerous. As they ventured down this path, the civilization was becoming more self-sufficient and often distancing itself from the values that once guided it. Here, we start to see the weight of the choices made and the inevitable crisis arising from this cultural and technological independence. Raising herds, for example, was not just a practical activity, it was a fundamental shift in humanity's relationship with nature. For the first time, humans were dominating and domesticating animals on a large scale, altering the natural course of the pre-flood world. This brought prosperity and security, but also a new sense of ownership and power over creation. People began to feel they had absolute control over their surroundings, and this sense of invincibility grew. The civilization, increasingly capable of shaping the environment, began to walk a fine line between advancement and unchecked pride. Music, another of this civilization's great legacies, transformed into a universal language and a way to express the era's desires and passions. Instruments like the harp and flute echoed through the streets of Enoch, creating an atmosphere of festivity and cultural sharing. Yet, this advancement also brought a shadow of distraction and detachment. Gradually, music ceased to be just a way to celebrate life and became a tool to mask difficulties and conflicts. The harmonious notes concealed tensions brewing beneath the surface as the city became entranced by its own achievements. The crisis was forming, and few noticed the signs. Furthermore, metalworking became a symbol of power and transformation. As metalworkers mastered the ability to shape iron and copper, they created weapons and tools that expanded humanity's control over nature. This innovation marked a significant leap for civilization, but also meant a step toward more intense and dangerous conflicts. With the creation of weapons, violence became more common, and the struggle for power and territory intensified. Enoch was no longer just a city of discoveries, it was a place where force and aggression dictated the rules. The crisis was nearing, and the tension was palpable. These technological and cultural innovations revealed the complexity of Cain's descendants. They were capable of creating beauty and prosperity, but were also susceptible to the temptations of pride and power. The cultural and technological prowess led civilization to believe it was in control of everything. The distance from original values grew more evident, and the civilization was now at a crucial point. Music, herd raising, and metalworking were expressions of a society searching for itself, but also one losing itself in its own reflection. At this moment, we realize the weight of the trials this civilization faced. With every new invention, humanity distanced itself from its original purpose, entering a crisis that would echo throughout the ages. The innovations that once brought prosperity now represented a burden, a heavy responsibility that many were unwilling to bear. Civilization was torn between the desire to advance and the need to preserve the values that sustained it. The price of freedom and progress was high, and it was about to be paid. In the pre-flood era, one distinctive feature of humanity was its extraordinary longevity. Living for hundreds of years was common, allowing the knowledge and skills of ancestors to be passed down from generation to generation, creating a solid foundation for a rich and complex civilization. This longevity meant that each person accumulated vast experience, capable of learning, teaching, and continuously innovating over multiple modern lifetimes. Imagine having centuries to perfect a skill or develop a craft. The accumulated wisdom of a single life reached unimaginable proportions. This was the essence of the pre-flood world, an environment where longevity was not only a blessing but also a responsibility that came with its own trials. For this first civilization, time seemed like an ally but also proved to be a constant test of character and purpose. As years passed, humans developed not only practical skills but also a complex network of values and traditions, intertwined with technological and cultural advancement. However, this abundance of time also allowed pride and resentment to take deep root. It was a cycle in which some pursued goodness and wisdom, while others succumbed to moral decline, violence, and corruption. That longevity, initially seen as a divine gift, now bore the burden of sin and the fall. Every wrong decision echoed through the years, multiplying its effects within society. This knowledge transmission was one of the pillars driving development. The first civilization, thanks to the longevity of its inhabitants, became a kind of living repository where innovations and stories were passed from parent to child with remarkable accuracy. But this prosperity, while strengthening humanity, also presented a challenge: the temptation to believe human knowledge could replace divine guidance. Adam and Eve's descendants saw themselves growing more powerful, increasingly confident in their ability to control their lives without realizing they were heading toward a precipice. It was a test for civilization, a trial by fire that demanded wisdom, but not all were prepared to face it. The effects of this longevity also manifested as rivalries and divisions. Over the centuries, entire families carried histories of conflicts and alliances, and disputes over power and territory became more complex and frequent. The prolonged lifespan made grudges and resentments persist across generations, creating a society where tensions were almost as long-lived as those who harbored them. It was as if humanity was accumulating not only knowledge and skills but also wounds and grudges, which became entangled within the relationships and traditions of this civilization. Longevity, in this sense, showed its dark side, where time amplified not only wisdom but also divisions. The longevity and development of the antediluvian civilization reflect a paradox: the more humanity learned and dominated, the further it drifted from the original values that guided it. With every step forward, civilization moved away from Eden's innocence, entering a realm where knowledge and power came at a price. The trials intensified, and the moral crisis became increasingly apparent. The first civilization was on a collision course with its own ambitions, and the longevity that once promised a full life now revealed itself as a doorway to corruption and decline. And so, we reach a point where we realize that all the accumulated wisdom, all that prolonged life, brought humanity a hard and ironic lesson: the more one seeks to dominate the world, the more one sees how fragile human nature truly is. This was a civilization that, despite its development, stood on the edge of a precipice where every advance was accompanied by a growing shadow. And now, we wonder, how far could this go? Would the antediluvian civilization have one last moment of redemption, or was it destined to face the consequences of its own decline? As the antediluvian civilization prospered, something dark began to slowly infiltrate its heart. The longevity, knowledge, and power that once symbolized progress now brought a heavy burden. The moral decline started to erode society from its roots, revealing itself through the actions and choices of its inhabitants. Cain, the first to take a life, initiated a sequence of events that would echo throughout the pre-flood world. His act of violence became a bitter legacy, and the civilization that was born under his name was marked by constant conflicts and disputes. At this point, the concept of morality was being distorted, and what was once seen as deviance now seemed increasingly common and acceptable. The moral crisis intensified with the introduction of polygamy and the relentless pursuit of power. Polygamy, practiced by Lamech, a descendant of Cain, was not merely a personal choice but a symbol of a desire for control and domination. Lamech, known for his violence and lack of scruples, was the first to boast of his cruel actions. He declared that if Cain was avenged 7 times, he, Lamech, would be avenged 70 times 7, showcasing pride and brutality never seen before. Human pride was reaching new extremes, and the value of life was being constantly degraded. The civilization that once flourished now felt the weight of its own choices, and the future seemed increasingly bleak. This decline extended beyond physical violence, affecting the hearts and minds of the era's inhabitants. Rivalries grew more intense, corruption spread, and respect for values and others vanished. The concept of justice began to be shaped according to the interests of the powerful, and the truth was twisted to justify selfish actions. Society, increasingly consumed by pride and sin, was on a path of no return. Greed, selfishness, and a thirst for power became the new order, and the moral crisis reached alarming levels. It was as if, with each act of corruption and violence, humanity was sealing its own fate. This was a civilization where work, culture, and knowledge were used for both good and evil. The innovations that had brought prosperity now fueled vanity and a desire for superiority. Those who held power and influence used their abilities to control and subjugate others. Family relationships, once a societal pillar, were deteriorating, and respect for previous generations faded away. The antediluvian world became a place of constant tension, where fear and distrust were common feelings. Humanity was at a critical point, where each decision pushed civilization further toward chaos. The moral crisis culminated in a divided society, where violence became a common response to problems, and greed overshadowed any bond of loyalty or love. This was an era in which the human spirit, once marked by hope and progress, was now dominated by resentment and unchecked ambition. And though some tried to remain faithful to old values, their voices were drowned out by the crowds clamoring for power and revenge. The crisis was complete, and the weight of sin hung over humanity like a shadow refusing to fade. And so, we face an inevitable question: how far could humanity go before something or someone intervened? Could this civilization redeem itself or return to a life of balance? The antediluvian world had reached a breaking point, where the moral crisis became the defining force of its story. But perhaps this wasn't the end yet. Perhaps there was one last chance for redemption or an intervention that could save humanity from its own destruction. The moral crisis and corruption that dominated the antediluvian civilization reached an unsustainable point, and something had to be done. Amid a society where chaos and decadence were the new pillars, a quiet hope remained: a man named Noah. He and his family stood out in a scene where wickedness reigned, remaining faithful to the values and principles that had long been forgotten. Noah was the symbol of resistance, the last vestige of humanity that still remembered the teachings passed down since Eden. His calling to build the ark was both an act of faith and a final chance for humanity to regain the path it had lost. The reward, however, would come only to those willing to listen and change. The building of the ark was, in itself, a process of renewal and hope. While Noah worked, day after day, the world around him continued to crumble. Humanity, steeped in its arrogance and disbelief, mocked his efforts, viewing the ark as madness, a pointless project. But despite criticism and isolation, Noah persevered. He understood that judgment was near and that the ark was the only way to secure a future. Noah faced his own trials, dealing with skepticism and loneliness, but his faith and determination served as a beacon, a reminder that redemption was still possible. The ark was more than a physical refuge, it was a symbol of resistance, a promise that humanity could still be saved. When the first drops of rain began to fall, humanity faced the reality of its destiny. The flood, which had only been a distant threat, now became an inevitable and overwhelming event. The waters began to rise, and the civilization, which had once prided itself on progress and self-sufficiency, was now at the mercy of an unstoppable and uncontrollable force. The men who had once laughed at Noah now ran in despair, trying to save what they had built, but it was too late. The corruption and pride that had filled their hearts now demanded payment. Noah and his family's reward was survival, a rare and unique gift amid the destruction. The ark became a world apart, a refuge where knowledge, values, and faith could be preserved. As the storm raged outside, Noah and his family navigated for days and nights, patiently waiting for the waters to finally recede. Their reward for faithfulness was not only physical salvation but the responsibility to restart civilization and carry the memory of what had happened. Noah knew that he and his family were the last link between the world that had been and the one yet to come. The crisis had transformed into redemption, and the flood, which initially seemed like punishment, now represented a chance for a new beginning. Finally, after many days, the waters began to recede, and the ark found rest atop a mountain. Noah and his family disembarked, marking their return to the world with renewed purpose. They were the first inhabitants of a new era, tasked with rebuilding civilization based on the lessons of the past. The antediluvian story, marked by advances and decay, was now a memory to be preserved and respected. Noah and his descendants bore the mission of passing this story on to future generations, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would never be repeated. The return, therefore, was not just a new opportunity but a profound responsibility. The end of the pre-flood era leaves us with mixed feelings of loss and hope. We lost the first civilization, with all its complexity and potential, but we gained the chance for a better future. It is an eternal lesson about the consequences of human choices and the strength of those who remain faithful even amid corruption. And now, the question is, are we ready to learn from the past and apply these lessons in our own lives? Throughout this journey, we explored the rise and fall of a civilization that lived intensely, accumulated knowledge, and thrived but also lost itself in its own corruption. The story of the pre-flood world reminds us that advancement without morality leads to chaos and that today's choices echo into the future. Noah and his family, having survived the flood, carried with them the legacy of an era and the mission to rebuild with a renewed commitment to faith and truth. They represent the return to a path of humility and purpose. And now, you too can carry this story with you. Remember that each decision shapes who we are and how we live, and there is always a choice to be made between good and evil, between true progress and decay. Stay with us, as many more stories and lessons await. Subscribe to the channel and join the next journey as we learn from the past to inspire our present and future.